Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Erwin Kuperberg. I'm chairman of the Conservation Commission, and I'd like to welcome all of you. This is an official Conservation Commission meeting. We are holding it, though, jointly with members of the Lower Lake Working Group. So I'm joined here by members of the Lower Lake Working Group Steering Committee, of which I'm a member representing the Conservation Commission. First of all, Robert Nyatt, who many of you know, was formerly town manager. Steve Coombs lives right by the lake. Bob Mazie, also a resident of right here in town and on the DRB. And Diane Holm, who lives in Chester. So welcome. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First of all, I see that the window's open, so I hope things don't cook up too hot in here. And for anybody who's new to the building here, there's a bathroom right over there. So much for that. So the agenda for tonight, what we're going to do is the following. We're going to begin with a few opening remarks, just to give you all a background about the lake itself and about the Vermont Department of Forest and Parks plan for Lower Lake. And then we're going to take a look at a list of concerns that the steering committee and the entire Lower Lake Working Group has uncovered over the past few months. And by the way, I should also add that the working group is made up of about 35 to 40 members representing 2 counties and many towns in the area, not just right here in Londonderry. So to begin, let me just get this set up. Okay, very good. Let me make that bigger if I can. No, I can't. Okay, but you can all read that, I hope. So, what I left out was at the end of our presentation, we're going to open up the floor to your questions and comments. So basically, we'll ask in the interest of time that there be no questions or comments while we're making the presentation, and then afterwards you'll all have a chance. And what we'll do is we'll call everybody who wants to speak. I will ask that we allow everybody who wants to speak to go at least once before anybody else gets a chance to go a second time. And the other ground rule is going to be that please don't take too long because there are a lot of people here and it could be a long night. For example, if everybody took 2 minutes and 20 people spoke, that would be 40 minutes. So that would be a big chunk of the evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all, when you do get up to make your comments or ask your questions, to please be as brief as possible. And if sometimes we like to hear ourselves speak, as I sometimes do. Sometimes we get carried away with a passion for our thoughts, which I sometimes do. So I'm going to help you. And if anybody seems to be getting a little too carried away, not to the benefit of the group, I'm going to politely ask you to cut it down. And I hope nobody will be offended if I do that. I'm not going to be doing it based on what you're saying. It'll be just about brevity and keeping things brief so we can keep things moving along and nobody melts or gets home at a ridiculous hour. So that's how we're going to do things. And let's begin. Why are we here? As I said, the Lower Lake Working Group over the past few months has taken a big, hard look at the state's plan, and we found issues with it. The state is the steward of a very beautiful park, and I think we're all here because we love Lower Lake, and they have been managing it for many years. They've had a long-range plan for what they want to do with it, and it's full of good ideas and excellent intentions, but we found issues with it, which we hope will be resolved. They've already resolved many of them, so we're just here so that as a group we can think these things through and help the state decide, because they do want to get our feedback on these issues. Just to give a brief overview of the lake and tell you a little bit about it, I'm going to call on Diane.
Okay. Do you have our famous map to put up? Ta-da! Okay.
Bear with me while I do that. Oh, okay.
Lake State Park's a relatively small state park. It's 356 acres. 102 of those acres are lake. The rest of the land is mostly forested with a lot of wet areas here and there. There's and my map has disappeared. Thank you. There's a 3.5-mile loop trail that goes around the lake. The most heavily populated and used areas of this lake start up in here where the lodge is and the old cabins are situated, where the beach is, down through the shore of the lake over to a nice fishing and picnic area, down through the boat access area, and then down along here there's some picnic tables before the dam. So when you look at this whole part of the lake, the state park, only a small portion is really used heavily by the people who visit it. The access road, which is here, comes off of Lowell Lake Road, which comes off of Route 11. What's important to know about this access road is that it's a single-lane gravel road. On the right-hand side, you pass by a stream, that's the outflow from the dam, and on the left side is a high embankment. And the beginning of the access road right here, you can kind of see the border of the state park, is private land. This situation with this road is important to understand when we're discussing increasing parking areas and increasing visitors and overnight lodging. There is a wide multi-purpose trail that goes from the boat access area up through north to the end of the lake and Little Pond Road. That is a wide trail that's used by ATVs for park maintenance and it's a part of the trail system. So that 3.5-mile loop is on that trail. There is no easy way to manage the flow of traffic that would result from increased development. And one of the reasons that Lowell Lake is so unique and fascinating to visit is the wetlands. The wetland up in the northern part is a marsh, and it's the water filtration system for the lake. It's the purification system. It's also fairly shallow up there, great place to canoe. Waterfowl love it. On the southern end of the lake is a very unique situation. We have a swamp, a fen, and a bog. The fen in particular is very unique to Vermont, to have that be a part of that state park. This swamp, the part that's closest to the lake, has a name. It's called the Hemlock Sphagnum Acidic Basin Swamp. And in that you will find a number of pitcher plants, a great number of plants and grasses, but particularly pitcher plants and the purple bladderworts, which are plants that eat insects for their food. Very unique. It's wonderful to paddle around, and you can do this. There is a water channel that goes through there, and all you have to do is shorten your stroke or take apart your kayak paddles to get through. But it's a must on your trips through canoeing on the lake. The lake has islands, several in fact, and one has picnic tables on it, and it's a great place to paddle over to, have your lunch, go for a swim, and just call it home for a couple hours. There's a beach in front of the old lodge right here. And it has a grassy area where the lawn was in front of the lodge. It's a wonderful place for families to bring their blankets and their kids and just take some time and swim and enjoy the whole atmosphere of the lake. There are picnic tables, as I mentioned, set up along this portion of the lake. Good places for fishing and just a place to sit and listen to the quiet. And as you cross the dam, which is down here, the hiking trail starts here, but if you take a right and go up the hill a short distance, is a Revolutionary War cemetery. It is really a special place. You walk in there, the ground is uneven, and you know it's sacred. And I encourage you to wander around, read the names and dates as you can. and simply imagine the rest of the stories.
Thanks, Diane. And in case you didn't know it, the town of Londonderry was originally established right over here under the name of Kent. It was changed to Londonderry later on. It was named after Londonderry, New Hampshire. You never very imagine. Okay, I'd like to give you a quickly as possible overview of the state's plan. Beginning in 1999, the state came up with a general management plan, and it provided for guidance for long-term management and development of the park. And I'd like to highlight this that came right off of the beginning of the plan. The challenge for managing the park is to balance these dual and somewhat conflicting purposes, to protect the special natural resources such as underdeveloped shoreline, water quality, wildlife habitat, and wetland community, while providing visitor services and facilities necessary to support a high-quality outdoor recreation experience. So that tension between preserving the land and also providing for quality recreational experience, there's a tension there. And I think before anything else is discussed here, I think every one of us can agree on this statement right here, that there's a challenge to making this work. And I think if we'll start from that point, that we're all really believing in the same things, maybe with different approaches, we can hopefully find some common ground. The LMRP had two main elements: land use, and the objectives were to, I'm not going to go through all of these, but to manage the resources, to provide recreational opportunities, interpretive, informational facilities, access and transportation, particularly to limit the traffic circulation and parking requirements, and then for operational activities by the Park Service to minimize their impacts on the resources. So that was the first element, was land use. The second element was facilities and operations, and included these main proposals. Number one, to retain only one public access road going in and out at night. And if there were to be an additional extension for nighttime use, it would be gated at night to keep people from having traffic at night. The second was to have 8 or 9 cabins. Now, I don't think you didn't mention the cabins, but historically there are cabins there from a camp that was running there many years ago. So the plan originally included 8 or 9 renovations of those cabins for overnight use with electricity but no plumbing, and also including removing 3 of them that were closest to the lake to minimize the impact of the lake. And there's also a lodge, used as a low-key facility for groups. Add a centralized bathhouse, since there would be no toilet or plumbing facilities in those cabins, to keep the existing parking lot with a 20-car capacity, but add another one for overnight use. There's a cottage on Birch Island to be used for staff housing, use cabin and lodge rental for revenue generation, and also to have a small nature center and outdoor interpretive and trail signs. So those were in the original plan. In 2015, the Park Service came up with an addendum, and that addendum was published in draft form in 2015 and approved in 2018. And it addressed changes to policies within the agency, absence of management outside of the park facilities, and included assessments for forest and park resources and plans for infrastructure. So basically, they were looking at things and had more data and moving forward with their ideas. These are the highlights of the plan. Now, if you're really interested, both of those plans are right here, and it could be an interesting afternoon of reading for you to learn all these details. But I'm giving you the Cliff Notes, and this is like a super abbreviated version. So these are the highlights of that plan. The concept of overnight use remains similar to the vision as it was outlined in 1999. So they're holding on to that vision. Now they're talking about renovation or replacement of 16 structures for overnight lodging, 12 one-room cabins, and 4 two-bedroom cottages with these additions: compliance with with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which involves, as you probably know, changes to sizes of doorways, ramps, paved surfaces or accessible surfaces, and so on. An access road and several parking areas, connecting walkways between the cabins, bathroom and shower facilities, and a separate beach area for that overnight area. In addition, a possible renovation of the larger building for events of some kind, fees for all day use, as well as for overnight lodging, and logging in the park with clear cuts of up to 1.5 acres. So again, this was in the plan addendum from 2000, that was approved in 2018. Since that time, Forest and Parks has made further modifications. In some respects, they have been listening to the community and their own assessments to modify things. So, for one thing, they drastically cut back the scale of logging. And I will say that the Conservation Commission has not challenged, as many in the community have, the logging, because logging is a normal part of forestry practice. And that we feel, the Conservation Commission feels that the logging activities are in line with things you have to do to maintain a healthy forest. I think most of us here understand. They've talked about expanding the parking lot to up to 40 to 50 spots. And in our most recent meeting with them, we, as a group, met with the stewardship team up in Springfield last week, 2 weeks ago, and they told us that there are now 4 main design concepts being considered. One is day use with overnight use in the existing cabins. Number 2 would be day use and overnight use in new cabins, not the existing ones, but new ones that will be built further back away from the lake. Third possibility is day use only and use existing structures for other activities such as events or educational activities. Number 4 being day use only. So those are the 4 general design concepts that Forest and Parks are looking at now. There may be some additional updates to this that I don't know about, that we don't know about, but that's the latest that we had. And a lot of this is a moving target, so if somebody has knowledge about some additions to this that we don't know about, then good. So right now, I want to go through the concerns, the main concerns that we have highlighted. And we presented these concerns to the team back in February 21st, with a detailed questionnaire where we said, look, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? They were basically questions. And that was on February 21st. And as of today, we hadn't heard back from them, except that I was told that at 5 o'clock they gave us a response. We haven't even had a chance to look at that response. But I'm going to go through the things that we brought up with them. And as we do, we're all going to share some elaboration on these things. So, number 1, that the plan will result in a significant increase in visitors to the park while failing to address existing overcrowding, which has exceeded previous projections. So, Rob, I'll ask you to take that.
Well, I think anybody who's been to the lake knows that it can sometimes be very crowded, particularly on a weekend, particularly on a holiday weekend. And I think anyone who's used the lake for a long period of time knows that crowding has increased pretty significantly. And the state's own numbers bear that out. They made a recording of how many people attended the park since 2014. From between 2014 and 2018, attendance increased 180%. With 2018, they recorded 15,000 visitors to the park. It's interesting to note that back in the 1999 plan, they made some projections about what they expected going forward in terms of usage, and they actually underestimated the number of visitors by a factor of 10. They were way off. So it kind of illustrates the fact that it's very hard to tell how these trends are going to go, but it's pretty clear that the number of people going to Lower Lake is going to increase. And that number of people represents a stress on the lake. It represents a stress on the surrounding forests and wetlands and habitat. So it clearly needs to be managed. And from our perspective, the plan that they are suggesting is more of a development plan than a management plan, and may actually, well, likely will bring more people to the park, but we still don't have a way to manage those people and the impacts on the park. When we met with the stewardship team they admitted that they have noted degradation of the shoreline and the trails, and that's because of the number of people. And given that Lowell Lake is relatively small and fragile, that degradation of the shoreline can result in sedimentation and erosion and issues that could affect water quality. So the number of people on the lake is critically important to the health of the lake. So again, our concern is, how are we going to manage this organic increase of people that exists before you do anything? And now you're proposing some development that will clearly bring in more people. So what's the plan in the long term?
Okay, number two. Actually, the original plan projected that in the future there would be 1,500 day-use visits per year. Last year there were 15,000, so underestimated by tenfold. So number two, the plan to require an exemption from town of Londonderry zoning regulations that were designed to protect the lake.
So the town of Londonderry, like a lot of towns, has a comprehensive zoning bylaw package. Londonderry is unique to some regard in that they long ago recognized the sensitivity of Lowell Lake and Lily Pond and some other areas, and they created conservation districts. And there is a conservation district called the Shoreland District that its whole purpose is to protect Lowell Lake and Lily Pond. It includes things like mandatory setbacks from the shoreline, retaining vegetation to mitigate erosion and that kind of thing. When the park first sort of reactivated this plan, I was the zoning administrator, town administrator, and flood administrator for the town of Londonderry. So I was the one that was communicating with Forest Parks and Recreation about what their long-term plan was going to be. And the very first thing they wanted to do was kind of dip their toe in the water, and they wanted to add a greeting station for the rangers, which they have done. It's a small building. And they approached me and said, we'd like to do this. And my answer was, well, we have zoning, so you need to put in for a permit. In a fairly short order, they let me know that they wanted an exemption from our local zoning. And they quoted some language in the zoning which does allow exemptions for public use. And because this is a park, they technically qualify. The issue is, the intent of the zoning is to protect Lowell Lake. And the state has said, that's fine, but we want an exemption from that particular zoning. So that's a concern as well. When we met with Forest Parks and Recreation, we asked them if they would consider complying with the intent, if not the letter of the law. So in other words, can you abide by that zoning that was designed specifically to protect Lowell Lake? So put whatever you're going to do, whatever construction activity, back in the setbacks and retain all of that. And they thus far have declined, and it is likely that they are going to seek exemptions going forward. And in fact, they issued a press release on April 24th that has some language in there which is very interesting. It says, meetings and conversations with town officials have taken place about the applicability of town zoning ordinances. Well, that makes it sound like they're really interested in the zoning and would like to comply. But when we then went and talked to the town administrator and the zoning administrator, he said the conversation was much different. They actually asked him to look at a state statute, 24 VSA 4413, which is a state law that basically allows the state to go around local zoning. So it's pretty clear that going forward, whatever happens with this plan, it's not necessarily going to follow the zoning that was specifically designed to protect Lowell Lake.
Number three, the plan does not include a comprehensive environmental impact analysis and does not adequately address the potential impacts on the lake, wetlands, forests, and habitats, including the potential for negative impacts on a nesting pair of loons and other wildlife.
So normally when large development projects are undertaken, certainly in the private sector, they also take on a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. So they look at all aspects of their plan, and there's kind of a standard protocol for doing that. It includes looking at all the potential environmental impacts, economic impacts, even cultural impacts in the surrounding community. It also, the protocol requires that the developer comes up with alternatives. So if this is going to be too much of an impact, what else could we do instead? And we've asked multiple times Forest Parks and Recreation if they would conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment, and they have said no, that is not their process. They have a different process completely internally, where they meet with the stewardship team, which is made up of members within the A&R agency. And it's certainly less formal, it's less documented, and it's an internal decision. Forest Parks and Recreation has already hired several consulting firms to work on this project. None of them were hired to do environmental assessment. They were all hired to look at how can we renovate the cabins, where can we put the cabins, how can we handle bathroom facilities, that kind of thing. And they've also been hired to do a marketing study on how they can bring people to the cabins. So we're missing a big piece from our perspective. We're missing a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. And Erwin mentioned that we submitted questions to them in February, and we've been asking for answers, and we haven't gotten them. At 5:05 today, they dropped the answers on us. And I was trying to read them in the car like it was the Mueller report. And basically, there's nothing particularly new in their response. But to the question when we asked, why have you not done environmental impact assessment? And they said, because we don't have a final plan. Well, this plan has essentially been unchanged since 1999. And our question is, you've already hired consultants to tell you the best way to construct those cabins and the bathrooms and all the rest. When are we going to look at the environmental impacts, the potential impacts in a holistic way? And from our perspective, it's sooner rather than later. And right now that's a concern because that hasn't happened and doesn't look like it's going to happen, but everything else seems to be moving forward.
Number 4, the plan is inconsistent with Forest Park and Recreation's stated goal to maintain and improve forest blocks and habitat connectors by developing on land clearly defined by the state as including sensitive and highest priority natural features and wildlife corridors.
You have the maps, right? Yeah. So there is a newly enacted by the state of Vermont, anyway, it's called Act 171. And basically what it is there's large tracts and large blocks for habitat for large animals and stuff throughout Vermont. And there's small corridors for them to connect. And actually one of the largest ones, the 3,500 acre Glebe Mountain, and also in Peru is the largest block in the state. And they track all this information on how wildlife moves around. And it basically moves consistently from Massachusetts all the way up into Nova Scotia. And they've got to have ways to be able to travel from one area to another. And what they're trying to get each town to do is to make regulations based on this information of the Act 171 on not allowing development in the corridors and the areas where the animals are known historically to travel. So you can see on these red areas up in there, these are areas that are crossings and stuff that are known crossings for wildlife. They're moose, they're large animals and stuff that cross through there. So, you know, the state is trying to get each town to, and our town is in the process of doing it, and putting regulations together to address Act 171 and how it would benefit this particular, our town, and in conjunction with this act. When we went and met with the stewardship team in Springfield anyway, and it's like, I was just curious because I had talked to, this was developed by Fish and Wildlife. And the lady who was very familiar with it, I'd been on the phone with her several times, and she said, you know, it's like, well, they should have a stewardship team working with you on helping you guys design a plan and stuff, even if it is surrounding Lowell Lake. And it was an obvious disconnect between Fish and Wildlife and Parks and Recreation. It's like they do not really work hand in hand together on this whole project. But when I brought it up, some of the people from Parks and Recreation were like, huh? And then they said, oh, by the way, this guy that's on the phone here is the author of Act 171. And the people that were from Fish and Wildlife that were part of the stewardship team, they knew all about what was going on with that. So it's good that I brought it up, and it's good that we have this, but it's like our town needs to implement how we're going to address it, and we're in the process of doing that now. Because it's important, because it's like, if you look, the dark green area around there is critical area, critical wildlife habitats, and the crossings are in the red. Those are going across roads mainly, but the high density of where animals travel and connect are the dark green. That's how they get to other areas, large blocks that they need. I think that's all I got.
Yeah, well, we also have this, by the way, you might find this interesting if you're a little bit on the nerdy side. The state has this BioFinder application. If you just Google BioFinder, you'll see it. And what they do is they give you a map of the state, and you can zoom in on any particular area, as we did for Lowell Lake. And you can look at overlays that define a million different aspects of the geology and flora and fauna and water quality and other aspects of state lands. So one example was using the BioFinder to identify highest priority wildlife crossings, which is a category, but just a couple of other examples. There's also a layer called riparian wildlife connectivity, which unfortunately it's a bad color, but it's all around here. So the lake is surrounded by riparian wildlife crossings, and they also define rare species. This is a big circle showing rare animal and plant species. They don't usually tell you what the rare species are because they don't want people running off and looking for them. But these are just some examples of the kinds of things that you can find when you use the BioFinder application that we found that are right there. Next, although Lowell Lake is one of the most pristine water bodies in Vermont, the proposed proportion of cabins to the size of the lake is way higher than other state parks that have cabins or overnight facilities. We have data on this. The percentage, the ratio of cabins to lake is way, way higher in their proposal than it is at any other state park. The plan has no provision to prevent the introduction of an invasive species to a water body that currently has none. So yeah, well, that's just a negative. I mean, if you enjoy Gale Meadows Pond, for example, you would know that the lake has become completely overtaken by Eurasian milfoil and other invasive species, as many water bodies in Vermont have. Lowell Lake has no invasive species at the present time. Invasive species are introduced by people. They don't walk. And there's no provision right now as utilization of the lake by people increase to do anything to curtail that, other than there's signage saying, please wash your boat. But that's all they're doing. Overnight lodging will result in 24/7 car traffic in and out of the park, as well as light and noise pollution, and an end to that nice, quiet end of day, early morning time that many of us enjoy for fishing, kayaking, and just walking around.
Let me add a statistic, if I would, because this, again, comes from the state. When we question, we asked a very specific question: have you determined the carrying capacity of the park? And there's a scientific formula for doing that. There's a biological carrying capacity, how many people can be on the lake without disrupting species. There's a cultural carrying capacity, a social carrying capacity. In other words, if you're out on the lake in a kayak, at what point do you feel claustrophobic because there's 5,000 other kayaks out there? They so far have not produced that kind of study for us. But they did say, when we had kind of a discussion with them in Springfield, we think it's manageable because even at the busiest, under the plan that we have, if you went out there in a kayak, each kayaker would have 1.5 acres of water. But when you do the number, that means that would be somewhere around 70 kayaks on that lake at any given time. And then, so I went back and kind of revisited the math and looked at how many cabins they were proposing, how many people they projected in each cabin, and they said, by the way, 8 people in each one of those cabins. Let's suppose there was 4 kayaks for how many people are in the cabin. You combine that with a newly expanded parking lot, and we're pushing 100 kayaks on that lake at any given time, or possibly at any given time. So, that gives you some sense of how the character of the lake certainly would change. And if the character is changing dramatically, then the impact on the environment is likely changing as well, or increasing as well.
Yeah, I'd like to speak just a minute more on that. In 1999, on the original plan, the state understood that there were inherent limitations with regard to the type and amount of public use that can endure without experiencing significant damage to resources. So what they were looking at is how do they control that? The amount of parking and type of facilities provided at the park was viewed as the best method to control the amount of visitors. Through various discussions, it was determined that the day-use parking capacity would be limited to 20 vehicles. Now, maybe some of you have been over there, but currently there's a heck of a lot more than 20. They also thought that since if there was only 20 vehicles, there wouldn't be that many people there. Therefore, adding 12 more spaces for overnight, we'd have 30 spaces. And there'd be so few people, there'd be no problem having everybody sharing the shoreline. The most recent plan, which now is saying, gee, we need to increase the day parking, we need to have special parking for the overnight, and because there are now going to be too many people over there to allow day use in the area where the cabins are, we would need to restrict that area. So you're now talking about putting more people in less space, and the reason the cabins came up initially, and I've got their own thing here, is that they did a revenue projection and expenses to run the park initially. The cabins were going to be generating somewhere around $44,000. Day use fees, $4,000. So the original impetus for the cabins was revenue. Today, the Stewardship Committee in our meeting said that revenue no longer plays a role in their decision of how to develop. So our feeling is if it doesn't, why would you bring in another user group, day users, overnight users, and say, gee, because initially it said this isn't going to increase the number of people, but as Robert said, we're talking 80 people there all the time in small cabins. They're going to clearly be outside. So our feeling is, and we challenge the Stewardship Committee to look at that and go back to what their job is. Stewardship means we take care of the resource. And if you're taking care of the resource, unfortunately, in all of our lives, we cannot do everything. And we all have to make some decisions. And we've challenged them to go back and look at that and say, gee, what is right for the lake? And you have a job to provide for the day users a quality experience which is already impaired. Why would you cut down by the amount of space by almost half and to also be saying you're going to increase the number of people? We're fairly optimistic that they're going to take that and run with it. That's one of the reasons of the meeting tonight, is so they can understand, hopefully, with your comments, that maybe there's some agreement in the room here. Thank you.
One of the most frustrating things that we've tried to unravel in our conversations with them is when we talk about the need for a management plan to control crowding already. Let's not even get to that. They say our only mechanism right now is the limited parking. So then they go ahead in the next breath and say, as part of our plan in the last document, we could have as many as 50 parking places. Well, they would then lose their only mechanism to shunt down overcrowding. So we have not gotten a straight answer, but it's frustrating when you say this is how we control it, and we want to get rid of the mechanism we use to control it. How are you going to control it going forward? Which keeps bringing us back to you need a management plan, not a development plan.
And then going back to the whole issue of light and noise pollution, I think, Bob, you had some comments on that.
Yeah. A couple of, actually, that I thought was pretty interesting is like we brought this up with Forest Parks and Recreation about the lights that the cabins would generate, and they said that they would provide curtains. So,
Curtains aren't always closed.
yeah, and so, I thought that was interesting. It's like, and I did do, or actually my wife did a lot of research on some of the impacts that noise pollution, affects wildlife mating cycles and nocturnal animals and the way they behave. And so the light and the noise, it's because human noise is not normal for animals and stuff and wildlife. And this, it's interesting. It's like, and I caught this at the Nature Conservancy meeting that the town had a couple of weeks ago. And I had asked the question, or I heard them say that they would not allow camping there. And then they kept talking about something else, and I said, can you go back to that? And I want to hear that one more time. Can you, you do not allow camping? And they said, no, we don't allow camping. And I said, why? And they said that it was disruptive to wildlife in an environment where wildlife is supposed to be natural in their natural habitat, and people around 24 hours a day doesn't give them a break at all. So that's one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting. And it's like it's a fact. I mean, it's like we've got the information, and it's just they're ignoring it. Just like Erwin had said, that they're not doing the studies on the environment and the wildlife habitat that's right there. So.
Let's look at another impact of cabins. In keeping with the ADA requirements, repurposing those cabins may include paved surfaces and lighting, potentially contributing to stormwater runoff, lake sedimentation, and light pollution.
Yeah, and I think it's important to underscore the fact that ADA requirements are really important. I mean, clearly, this needs to be taken into consideration anywhere. But I think it's also important that we understand if they go ahead with the plan, it's not a free launch. I mean, they have to comply with ADA, for instance. What happens is that changes the scope of the development. The development then has potentially a larger impact because of what needs to be done for ADA. So if you're going to create 16 cabins for overnight use, and there's going to be bathrooms, and there's going to be access and all that, that access and all of those facilities need to be ADA compliant, which they should be if you're going to do it. But you need to look at this and say, the scope of what is being proposed, can Lower Lake State Park absorb that? So clearly you can't have people in wheelchairs going over rough trails. We're going to have some firm surfaces. We're going to probably have to have ramps. There's going to have to be lighting so they can get in and out in the evening. Again, that's an impact on the lake that should be considered as part of this comprehensive environmental impact statement. To say, yes, just say we're going to rehabilitate the cabins, and by the way, they're going to be ADA compliant. That's significant. We need to look at that. What does it do to the scope and scale of this development? And the answer is it makes it larger and makes the potential impacts greater.
Next one's kind of popular with some people around here. Plan does not address traffic and other impacts on the adjacent neighbors and surrounding community. Steve, you live right next door.
So a few people in this room are neighbors of the park. And it's interesting, if you're a close neighbor of the park, odds are you don't use it during peak times. It's something that, it's a wonderful facility, but it has a capacity. And, we're fortunate enough to be able to go over there on those quiet days and enjoy something that, you don't have to drive for hours to be able to experience. The idea that, we're going to develop the lodging for something that's going to be open on, probably throughout the summer and into the fall, brings a level of traffic. Already Lower Lake Road is a busy road a lot of the time. The road surface suffers from it during certain times of the year. The idea that we're going to be having, and the real word is development. If we were sitting here talking about Steve Coombs, developer, who wants to have a a cute little cabin community for rentals in the summertime there, and I would be saying, gee, it's going to be a wonderful place for families to come to. Odds are I wouldn't get too far. The state, on the other hand, looking at it, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be looking at the management aspect of it. Whether it's a close neighbor or somebody further up the road, as you continue to develop different uses, i.e. overnight cabins, that's a whole new group of people coming in. One can assume they're going to be going in and out, they're not going to be sitting there 24/7. You have additional parking, which isn't all bad. Some additional parking might take some of the problem of cars idling out at the end of the park away. But if you continue to build, because right now they're saying we have to do this because the original plan said 20 spaces, but gee, you know what? We never really got around to figure what we're going to do, so now we're going to double that many spaces, and hopefully, in a few years we won't need to build more spaces and more spaces. Robert's point is that we're challenging them to manage the park, not develop the park.
Okay, we're getting toward the end. The plan does not address the maintenance of the dam, which is fundamental to the long-term sustainability of the lake. And Diane, you're going to address that, and you might as well also address other maintenance issues that aren't being covered in the plan, like trail maintenance.
Oh, actually, they've been working on that. Anybody who's been on that trail knows there's a lot of blowdowns. But the dam, when the park acquired the land in 1977, the dam was rebuilt at that time. It was inspected, we have an inspection report in the documents from 2010, and it's classified as a significant hazard class 2. That sounds kind of scary. What it really means is that should the dam fail, it's unlikely there would be human life loss, there would be economic and environmental losses. That's the significant hazard piece. Class 2 in Vermont means that it needs to be inspected by a structural engineer every 3 to 5 years. So the dam is fairly good right now. There's some signs of wear and there's a small crack, but I think the park will be doing structural assessments in a timely manner, but it's simply not mentioned in their plans.
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you about the trails. I know they deal with blowdowns and also removing hazard trees, but everybody who walks trails knows that there are some really muddy areas that aren't getting better. They need to build a lot more walkways over those areas. And I don't know if it may or may not be in their current budget to do that, but the plan doesn't address any of that. The plan doesn't include alternative proposals to reduce the impact on the park ecology and character. So basically, they've been stuck in that same mode. And finally, development is really unnecessary and costly, and there are better ways to use our tax dollars. We'll just leave it at that. So, what are some alternatives? We have proposed some alternatives. We are proposing some alternatives. You all may have some too. First of all, no overnight lodging. This would address the most significant threat to the lake and the surrounding ecology and reduce crowding, erosion, and habitat disturbance, light and noise pollution, and reduce taxpayer costs and impact on the character and experience of Lowell Lake. Now, if you remember that there were 4 design concepts I mentioned that they've recently arrived at, and this would address design concept number 4, which would be day use only. Next alternative suggestion is just to restore only 1 or 2 structures, not for overnight use, but for a nature center. There are wonderful opportunities there for education for us grown-ups, for children to learn about the park, its features, and all of that. So why not use those buildings or 1 or 2 of them for that purpose? And that addresses design concept number 3, which is day use only and existing structures for other activities, which they said, such as events. At the meeting, when they said events, I think I looked at them and everybody rolled their eyes. I think events, as in come and have an engagement party, that's probably not the kind of event that would contribute to the park's character in a positive way. But there are some nice events that can go on. and ensure development is compliant with the intent of local zoning that's designed to protect the park with Act 171, which is an A&R initiative, and do that. So that's all for us. And so just in closing, those are our thoughts. If you agree, you may not, but if you agree, we really encourage you to contact the Park Service, your local representative who so far hasn't been interested in pursuing any of this at all, and make your voice heard. And in keeping with that, I forgot, if you did sign-up sheet, pass it around. Okay.
Erwin, may I speak?
Yes.
One of the important things about coming today is that in 1 to 2 weeks, we're going back to meet with the Stewardship Committee again. They invited us back. They were a little nervous the first time we got together, but it turns out that although we're sitting here saying, gee, there's a lot of problems, in our opinion, with the current plan, the Stewardship Committee is made up of, in all honesty, 5 or 6 pretty darn nice people. Forest and parks, think of them a little bit as relatively single-minded. We build parks, we improve parks, we make parks bigger, we make them better. Stewardship Committee's job is to sit back and say, okay, let's look at the bigger picture. We know you guys make good parks and everything, but what's appropriate in particular areas? Many of the things, when we were challenging them with, the Stewardship Committee seemed to be on the same page. What we want to be able to do is, when we go back for our next meeting, and this meeting is supposedly going to be showing more facts in what the plan is. Right now, there's been a newspaper article, we've seen some other things, but an actual sight of what are we actually really talking about doing hasn't come back yet. So we believe that there's going to be hopefully some modification. We've challenged the Stewardship Committee that what is being done at Low Lake maybe shouldn't be 100% a vote of, gee, what do I like, what do I like? Stewardship Committee should be looking at it and saying, what is right for the lake, what is right for the park? And quite honestly, what is right for citizens' use? So that's something that, please, as you're making your comments and things, and if you think about things, feel free to, we have an email site, we're all in town here, feel free to say things, because we're kind of a just pure democracy. We're a little group that got together. We've had a lot of input from different people. You know, we don't officially represent anybody in this room, but I think we have the same concerns at heart, and we remain optimistic that though there's a plan there, there can be a final plan, which is something we can all really live with.
Okay.
I don't think I see our state representative here. Is Kelly, are you here?
Well, we've asked her on several occasions to do something about this, and her response has always been, well, they're listening to you.
Well, okay, that's her response. But we elected her, and she should be listening to us. And also, which senatorial district is this? Is this Windsor County? Oh, it's Wyndham. Well, have we talked to our state senators?
We have not yet. We've thought about that. It's a bit of an escalation, so we haven't gotten to that point.
This taxpayer money, we elect these people, then this isn't a totalitarian thing. Parks and Recreation must be part of the executive branch, which means reports to the governor, right?
Yeah, and I could add that we also contacted Tom Bach, who is the representative for Windsor County in that area. He also sits on the oversight committee that has responsibility for forest parks and recreation, and he as well has not been willing to engage.
Should we then, in a group, engage them?
Yes.
Following on that line, could we get on the Facebook site or something, list of all these people who should be contacted?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yes,
definitely.
so there is we do have a Facebook.
And if you put on the sign-up sheet, if you sign the sign-up sheet, we can send it directly to you. We'll just email it to you. Yep.
Yes.
A specific comment. those of us who own property that is on Long Lake Road know that the road is sometimes not the best of shape. You can put a whole lot more cars on it. In addition to which, the last I looked, the logging trucks are going to go on it as well. Two questions. Who's going to maintain the road, given that the state, the town currently maintains it? And lastly, what law enforcement presence is there going to be as more people spend more time, including overnight, at the lake? You know, unfortunately, society today says enforcement probably is not a bad idea.
That was addressed in one of the plans, the police presence, I mean, and their answer was that the state police are responsible. So, you know how often the state... Yeah, so, I mean, we haven't got a police force. I don't know if there's a park police force in this state. No, I think so. No.
But he covers this whole side of the state.
Yeah, so there really is no, going to be much help with that other than random patrols. Yeah. As far as town road maintenance, a long section of that approach road is town road, and then after that is state land. So I guess it would fall on the town to maintain it. And if the logging trucks, I don't know if the logging trucks are going to go that way or use the other access roads. I don't know how that would work, but I don't know that they have any responsibility to improve the road after.
The original plan was that it would come out on Long Lake Road.
Yeah.
That may have changed, but then it seemed that they would have some financial responsibility. The road, as I said, it's not the best, Steve. In the best of times, you put an 18-wheeler loaded with wood on it, and it's going to degrade very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yes.
Two things. I live on Mountain Lake Road, and the 4x4 road starts at my driveway. So talk about issues with people coming. You know, the road was repaired a few years ago, so they go past our house at like 50. And it's not being maintained in between any longer. So that I don't know how we deal with that. But that's not my question.
Four-wheelers using the access road?
Oh no, it's a class 4 road.
Oh, Mountain Lake.
But Mountain Lake Road, right? So, but people go through there still. So I have to address the town and ask maybe for a speed bump or something. But my question is, if so, you guys were talking about how the state wanted or asking for these exemptions. If they go ahead and do that about the zoning, like not honoring the local zoning, is there a step beyond where we could go to continue the fight, so to speak? Does that make sense?
The zoning, both the local zoning has language in it that does allow exemptions for public use, which would be a park.
Right.
And there's also that state statute I mentioned, which allows state entities to override the local zoning if they can't do what they want to do and still comply. So there's probably technically not a lot you can do. You know, there was some discussion early on, if they didn't get the exemption right away, they would push the issue, which means, I mean, ultimately if the town said, we're not going to give you the exemption, they could be sued by the state. The real question is, should we not expect them to be good neighbors? And if the town has gone through the trouble of defining the sensitivities around Lower Lake and defining specific land use regulations to protect that, would we not expect the state, particularly one that has preservation in its mission statement, to be a good neighbor and at least honor the intent of that zoning? And that's what we would hope. Thus far, they haven't given indication that they're willing to do that.
Excuse me, can I point out that Kelly is back there? And she might want to come and talk to us about how she feels. That she can.
Well, in all fairness, she hasn't heard anything you said.
Yes,
We had another meeting that also was really important that you should all pay attention to. Just wanted to point that out. Springfield Medical System was having a meeting tonight about what's happening with that, but that's kind of a tangent. But I'm listening, but I just assume let you all speak.
I'm sorry. Yes.
How strong is the
corridor philosophies that this is part of. What's the team behind keeping the corridor proper and clean? Do they have a stronger, is that state, is that federal?
Well,
Don't they have a higher driving force on this than?
from a regulation perspective, no, not at this point. So Act 171, the intent of it is to get municipalities to recognize those corridors within their boundaries and to reflect those corridors in their local zoning and make some attempt to control development. But the onus is on the municipality. This gets back, and we had the similar discussion. Well, if you're requiring the towns to do this, should you not do something similar? And their answer was, and I read it in the car to that question, was nothing we're going to do is going to disturb those. That's it. No explanation, but basically, don't worry about it.
The comment I have, and I can research it further, is we spend some time in Texas. Texas is getting so populated in very fragile things. There's a place called Hamilton Pool, which is a real little jewel. And they've gone to a permit system to control the number of people that are allowed in and out. So
It unfortunately, it falls on the state to regulate themselves in this case because they insist they're exempt from local land use regulation. So it's up to them to regulate themselves. Yes.
Forest Parks and Recreation, Springfield office seems to be giving lip service to the idea that they're going to pay attention to what the public in Londonderry and the surrounding towns has to say about this. But so far I get no indication. I mean, there are a few of you that go to these meetings and you make wonderful presentations, but do they have any idea, or are they going to try and get any idea about how people in these towns feel about this development project? And are they going to pay any attention? Are they going to tabulate the numbers? The plants and animals aren't going to get a vote, but maybe at least the people around here ought to get a vote in this process. Are they interested in that argument?
They say they are, and programmatically they have had sessions of listening. In fact, one of the documents even quoted the number of petitions that were signed when a petition went around. So they've documented all the things that people say. And this summer they planned a series of listening sessions to do some more listening. So they listen a lot.
And I would just like to say, I would echo what Steve said. We get a kind of different feel and a different feedback from members of their Stewardship Committee that may represent fish and wildlife, or they may represent watershed, than we do from Forests and Parks. Forests and Parks is, they know what they want to do. They want more people in that park. They want to build overnight accommodations so they can offer the experience to more people, and I understand that. But we got a sense that the other people in the room may feel somewhat differently. And I honestly felt like we were being listened to by the director of the agency. How that plays out internally and politically, I don't know. But our approach is we're going to keep talking. We're going to give them as many facts as we can. We're going to try to reflect the community's feeling and hope that they will compromise to a point that the community can feel that that park is not going to be negatively impacted. But we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, in fact, we do sense that we're gaining a little bit of leverage, and I was quite surprised. You know, the director of Forests and Parks and Recreation was at this last meeting, and he came down from Montpelier. And I said to him, "Did you come down just to meet with us?" And he said, "Yes." So I think, I hate to say it, but if we make noise, we'll be heard, because it takes a little bit. You know, we're not getting play from our political leadership, so we need to really take the bull by the horns ourselves and let them know, and not necessarily in a hostile way, but as long as they know that this is the voice of the community and where we stand, I think we do have an impact in that way.
How does Wetland Protection Plan or Clean Water Act with state parks? What overrides what? Or can we at all talk about wetland protection plan here?
There are a whole myriad set of of regulations regarding water quality, lake shore, wetland, et cetera, they keep all of that into consideration, and they look at those things. Whether the things that they're actually implementing are fully compliant with those, we don't really know. And most importantly, as we pointed out already, they haven't done an environmental assessment to even say what those impacts as a result of this plan will be.
I mentioned before, let me just add to that, I mentioned before that they have a different process. They're not going to do an environmental impact statement. Their internal process is the stewardship team, and they evaluate this stuff internally. But I think it's important to note the language in their April 24th press release. They said, quote, "The reviews conducted so far demonstrate these concepts could be permissible under existing environmental regulations."
Yeah, but how
So
about sewer
their position is they really don't see any issues at current time based on the loose plan that they have.
Robert, is the finalization of the master plan still scheduled for August?
As far as we know.
How do they get a leaching field on that land?
We asked a question, one of the questions we asked was about septic systems and waste management, and they did, and you heard this better than I did, but essentially said we can put a septic system there.
No, they're doing composting.
No, they said they're leaning towards that, but they could accommodate a septic system.
There actually are in the plan, there actually is a septic system.
Water running through that land?
That's not true.
That's what they're saying.
I asked them specifically if they were going to, those cabins, when they ended up, the facility is going to conform to all 250. And they said they didn't have to.
Yes, that is true.
We do not have to.
That is true. And in the contract they signed with SE Group, which is one of the consultants, there was a bunch of instructions to the consultant, including giving them permission to do test borings. And we assume that was some variation of perk test or water management. That they have, in their answers to the questions at 5:05 tonight, said that was not funded. So I don't know what that means, whether they conducted it, didn't conduct it, or decided not to conduct it. Right. So that's all I can tell you is those tests were not funded.
I just have a quick question. Let's assume we're preaching to the choir here for the most part. I get the feeling that most people here are opposed somewhat to a lot of it. What are you proposing, while you still have this group of people here, that we do, say, talk to hopefully make some differences and change what they want to do? Because right now it sounds like you say, you're doing a lot of talking, they're doing some listening, but I'm not getting in the end that they're not just going to do what they want to do. So while we have a group of people, what is their suggestion, or is there a suggestion of what we should be doing?
There's only two ways the plan is going to be modified. Their own stewardship team is going to raise concerns that will be significant enough for them to modify it, or they will change because of political pressure. You represent the political pressure.
Right.
Well, how do you put that pressure on, I think is what people are asking.
You contact Forest Parks and Recreation.
Right. And it's like, because they have
The
not.
Springfield office.
Correct me if I'm
Sure,
wrong.
or Montpelier if you'd rather.
Not our political representatives and senators.
That's fine as well. They're involved and should be
Kelly's
involved.
here, and she's listening to us, and hopefully
Actually, it's Londonderry's, our senators, Senator Nick, Senator Clarkson, and, or I understood Londonderry was part of their senatorial districts.
Kelly,
I want to be sure I'm correct, so correct me if I'm wrong anyway. It's like I heard them because the director of Forest Parks and Recreation said that this project was not funded yet. Correct?
I mean, they have a fundraiser.
They have not got the funding. They have to go to.
Yeah,
It's
our
a
state
political
senators
thing.
had a fundraiser at the station, down here, before the election last year. And this is, for some reason, balancing populations around. Londonderry is part of the Windsor County senatorial district rather than. So.
well, just as a first step, I mean, Kelly, you're here. I hope that you're hearing what people are saying, and that hopefully is having an impact on you and what you would do. Similarly with, what was that fellow's name?
Tom Bach.
Tom Bach, he's in Windsor. Anybody here live in Windsor County? So
Well, we're part of that, but we're in the same senatorial district. So, I mean, Londonderry is. So those are the state senators whom you voted for.
I don't see why we couldn't make phone calls to the state senators.
I don't know either. I mean, they're, you know, you said political pressure. Well, politics usually means the people who are voting for their budget.
So will you guys be putting something on the Facebook link then, like maybe numbers that we can contact, emails?
It'd be easier for us if we just put you on the list and mail the stuff to you, email it to you.
Some of us are not Facebook.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who don't use Facebook.
Oh, right.
And we intended to live stream this tonight, and Facebook prevented us from doing that. So I'd rather avoid Facebook and just contact you
But it'll be
directly.
on GNet also.
Okay.
Thank you, GNet.
Yes.
You're welcome. Okay.
I have a point and a question. So my point is I have a profound disappointment for how Representative Pyala's engagement of this issue has been characterized here tonight. Because that has not been my experience, and I in fact find it offensive. My question is, we currently have 15,000 users at the park. What is the Lowell Lake Concerned Citizens Group proposing we do to manage that current problem this summer? Two things that come to my mind are not allowing people to walk dogs in the park. I think that that would cut down on a considerable source of the park's use. Also, a fee for access. Are those parts of your proposal? Or what are you proposing?
Well, I think that what's important to understand is that we're not necessarily proposing at this stage. Forest and Parks is, it's kind of like your yard, your house. Yes, we all share it, but they run it. They are looking at instituting fees, day user fees. It would clearly be something that they would do, and that's one method to possibly slow down the growth of use there. So that's one that they are clearly looking at. I'm not sure that limiting, you know, whether it's dog walking or not, is going to solve the problem we're talking about here.
But it does have a significant environmental impact. I mean, we're talking about wildlife, we're talking about the appearance of distemper in the state, a new strain of distemper.
But again, we're not getting into, at this stage, how they're operating today. We're looking at specifically what is the plan going forward. We're not happy necessarily with everything that's going on today. We're challenging them to do what you're saying, which is show a management plan to address issues that are already there before you start saying, let's dramatically increase the number of people coming and everything's grand as it is.
I also feel it's a mischaracterization of the state's intent to say that they're looking to increase traffic to the park.
Well, they are specifically...
They have said that, and in fact, they were quoted.
I know the source of what you're saying, but I don't believe that that's the intent of the state. I think the intent of the state is to manage the park more appropriately and to stem, to create a greater quality of experience at the park.
And it's also...
The director told us directly that one of their goals is to increase access to natural...
Across the state.
So, yeah, across the state.
But not specific to this park, and that's
No,
where I feel like
that's not true.
mischaracterizing.
One of his statements was, part of this is to get more people to come to Lowell Lake, to make it available to more people. You're free to call and ask them.
Craig Whipple.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
How does this park compare to other parks around the state? And I'm asking because this, I mean in terms of size and usage, this piece of land strikes me as a pretty small piece of land as state parks go. And I know that, I imagine that there are other state parks that are limited to day use. Is size a factor in that? Would this be one of the smallest parks in the state to have overnight use if it were developed in that direction? I'm just wondering about the facts and how things compare.
Well, we have data on as I mentioned earlier, on parks that have overnight use with lakes and the ratio of overnight accommodations to the size of the lake. And in other parks that have those things, the ratio is way less people to lake surface area than the proposal here at Lowell Lake.
And in 2018, Lowell Lake had the 4th largest growth in visitors of any state park in Vermont.
And Lowell Lake is also one of only 10% of the lakes in Vermont that does not have developed housing or cabins on it. So it's a relatively unique body. And our big point is once you go down the road of developing a lodging program, you don't go back. You know, it's something that this is a one time where, you know, if you enjoy the lake, you live in Londonderry, where we can say, hey, gee, you know, it's time to put a halt and maintain something that's going to be increasingly fragile and are a smaller and smaller entity going forward as far as undeveloped shorelines.
Yeah, I agree that it would be a disaster to develop it for overnight use. And I do think that contacting elected officials as well as state administrators is a very good idea, and it's not that hard to do. If you all could coordinate some of that info for us, that would be really helpful.
Could we put that on the Lowell on our Facebook page?
There's nothing to that Facebook page. It was set up just for using Facebook.
But it's still there.
It's there. Yeah.
Yeah, so we created a Facebook page to do a live stream tonight, which Facebook crashed and it didn't work, but it's there, so we can actually populate that with this kind of
But
information.
also send it out through the email.
Yeah.
And then you can email whoever you want to email and.
And if in an email, you could also include your alternative proposals.
Yes.
It's my understanding that the state wants to be able to have the state lands that they own pay for themselves. I think that that's been something going on for several years, and that's why we're seeing some of this. But there might be, if there's a lot of concern about developing such a small area, Parks and Recreation is a very different group than Fish and Wildlife. And has Fish and Wildlife had any chance to take a look at this?
Oh yeah, well that's what the stewardship team is.
Oh, they are, okay.
Yeah, so the stewardship team consists of people from all aspects of A&R, Agency of Natural Resources, including Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Well, my experience says that if you can get the word out to people and people can start looking at the pros and cons and you get some signatures on a petition, that will have a lot of power.
The environmental issues here can, as you would expect, be very complicated. And our hope is that as a stewardship team continues to talk about these now evolving proposals, that some of this stuff will get more light shed on it. And just to use one example, the issue of nesting loons. We brought this up early on, and the answer was there are no nesting loons. We now have confirmed there's nesting loons, and the state has acknowledged today there are nesting loons on Lowell Lake. So what does that mean? We don't know what that means, and potentially it could mean nothing for some sort of development plan, but it may very well mean a lot in terms of how you control traffic, where people go, what trails need to be redirected, or you just need to cordon off certain areas and not have people there at certain times. That's part of, in the private sector, would be part of a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. They don't do that, but we're hoping that the stewardship team will serve that purpose and identify all of these issues, and they will kind of move up on the priority, because we have not seen that as a priority so far. We have seen the 1999 plan change a little bit and kind of squeak forward, and the impetus seems to be, we want to do this plan. So we're hoping as the conversation goes on, the environmental issues get pushed higher up.
Can I just ask how this intersects with the Glebe Forest Block lands, if you know that map?
It doesn't physically touch it.
Okay, that's what I
But
was
it's part of the same wildlife corridors.
Yeah, the corridors connect.
The corridors do connect.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty important.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You know, no one has mentioned tonight about VORAC, about Governor Phil Scott's, creation of VORAC and how and the pressure that's applied to forest parks and rec under that mandate. And I don't think not everyone is aware of VORAC or what that whole, that plan is. And I think it's important because there actually is a lot of pressure placed on Forest Parks and Recs to implement that mandate. Governor Phil Scott in 2015 had a plan to bring in $3 billion in new summer tourism in order to save Vermont's economy. And the problem is that the focus is so clearly on economic goals that what's being compromised is what makes Vermont so special. It's not just Lowell Lake that's being impacted. There are lakes all over Vermont and other national areas that are being affected in the very same way, and local communities all over the state of Vermont are having meetings just like this and struggling to figure out how to respond and how to protect the areas that they love. So what we're doing here tonight is not, we're not the only ones that are dealing with this problem, and the idea of bringing more, tourism dollars to Vermont, in theory, is good. It's just, it has to be done in a way that doesn't ruin what we love, and I think that's going to take a lot more wisdom and foresight than what is being demonstrated right now by the state. So we might need to help them. We might need to actually make suggestions rather than wait for them to come up with a plan that we can approve. And timing, as I've been saying since December, timing is really of the essence, especially since the finalization of the plan is still scheduled for August, and it's going to be June 1st on Saturday. So it's kind of scary how quickly things are moving along, and it may just be railroaded through, and we may find that we're really not happy with the outcome. So, I don't have an answer to all that, but that's just weighing heavy on my mind.
Just going forward, I would suggest this summer, being a news reporter yourself, using the video on your phones and things, you see high volume at Lowell Lake. Numbers say one thing on paper, but if you can utilize your phone to say, look at the stress, what's going on Lowell Lake Road, and in there, cars idling and things of that nature, that's going to send another message besides your text or any letters. So, the more you get of that, that's going to send a bigger message going forward to the representatives.
So there were a couple of things I have to say. First of all, unfortunately, I did find invasive non-native species in there. I found Japanese stilgrass and did take what I saw. Then I saw another pretty big patch that I couldn't take at that time. But what about, additionally, the state and federally endangered species that we have in there? And is that going to be, fuel for protection is another thing. And it's encroaching on the trails, as a matter of fact, some of them. And Vermont statute already specifies additionally that development should be concentrated in town, in urban centers, or the town centers, and surrounding the town, we should be focusing on historic settlement patterns rather than rural sprawl, which this would increase rural sprawl. This is part of rural sprawl. And so the statute that decides development patterns is another one to use to talk about this issue.
Has anyone from the working group made contact with Wyndham Regional Commission about this? The Regional Planning Commission? I mean, planning and development is exactly what they do for the region. I think they could be really helpful in meeting you and parsing out the issues and finding resources to deal with the situation.
I think that my sense is your focus of the long-term health of the lake is absolutely the right focus, because if you lose that, everything goes. I also sense that from what I hear of the traffic you have with daytime users, it's already stressing the ecological quality of that area. And so for me, injecting a whole new type of use, which would be the overnight use, which the character of that use, nobody's really talked about it, is quite a bit different than little families coming and just kayaking and leaving. It's a totally different use. I'd be curious to see with this group here, just a show of hands, how many people would be against overnight use in this property, and that might be something useful for you all to have in your pocket.
How many would be opposed to overnight?
Yeah, so that's what I suspect.
Yeah.
And I think that's a right thing, because the difference of that development for that use would be huge on the impact of that. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Yes.
I worked 15 summers at a camp, and once you put in overnight anything, you're 24/7 managing it. You've got people that will make fires, and people that will not extinguish them when they're supposed to. And that goes on and on, that scenario. We had a fire that went from Lake Ossipee to Maine, just because windy day, dry conditions, and campfires. It's not practical.
Yeah, we raised the issue of the character of people that would use cabins, which isn't to say they were all bad people, but we tried to bring that point up, and they weren't responsive to that there's any issue with the folks that will come and do that. And they're just regular people like us that want to enjoy a nice lakeside experience, and maybe even if they had cabins, many of us would want to take advantage of that. But when you bring a lot of people in to come and hang out at night, things happen. And when I addressed how they're going to manage that, they said, well, there'll be 24-hour coverage by the ranger. Well, the ranger, cabins are over here, and the ranger's home is up there. Well, how often is he going to get down there?
You have to do rounds.
Yeah.
Continuously.
Let's go first, and then we come back. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, the question of money came up, and I'm curious what's really motivating these folks to go ahead with this. You're clearly aware that the town as a whole really isn't interested in this. We brought up a lot of good points, but yet they still seem dead set on going through with it. So, if money is a motivator for them, then the question is what's the budget? What's this going to cost? And what's the rate of return going to be on it? If they're looking at somewhere 300, 600,000, maybe more, how many cabins, how many nights? Exactly. Do they even know?
Well, to renovate all the cabins and do the whole thing, which I don't think they're looking at anymore, but in the original projection, it was $2.4 million. That was before they scaled it
And
back.
the total budget's like 3.5 million.
Yeah, it's a lot, but even on a smaller scale, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now they've worked out that the fees would pay for it and make money. It's hard to know, at least in my opinion, how big a driver revenue is for them. I do know that a big driver for them is that their forest parks and recreation. One of their goals is to get people access to use facilities more and more. So that's a big driver. It isn't like fish and wildlife. They're just interested in helping the fish and the animals. Forests and parks have a different agenda, so that drives a lot of it. And they get budget from the legislature. So I don't know.
Well, I think it's important to note that in their contract with SE Group, which is one of their consultants, there's money in the budget for a marketing study. And the marketing study is, if we do this, where are we going to draw people from? So it's pretty obvious, the intent is, we want to bring people here. If you're paying a consulting firm to figure out where you need to market the cabins once you build them, I mean, it's obvious that's at least a component of this.
But do we know that the revenue is driving the project, or the project is driving needing revenue? I don't know if we know the answer to that.
But I thought you said that they weren't concerned with the amount of revenue that they would get from running the cabins. Didn't that come out in your last meeting with them?
Now you see the difficulty in the conversation.
Well, that being the case, at some point they're going to have to take a look to see what the rate of return is going to be on this expenditure. And the state being in the state that it's in, as far as revenue goes, it seemed like it'd be pretty obvious to them that it's not going to be a winner, that they drop it as far as the money part goes.
Well, I think if Forest Parks and Recreation is not looking closely enough at that formula, certainly the Legislative Oversight Committee should be looking at that.
Gail?
Okay, yeah, thinking about economic development and many things you mentioned. In a sense, if you thought about it, by creating those cabins, they're taking revenue away from people who own lodgings and other facilities that take care of tourists in the area. If anything, we want to see more economic development in our town that's positive, and tourism is great. So if you have people taking advantage, or you really create even better places for people to stay in town, and you create ways for them to get there, you know, maybe on a bicycle or something like that, you know what I'm just saying? But I think if you thought creatively, it should be a public and private joining. And then you could have more use, if that's what their goal is, or have more people taking part in the park, but also have our town benefit from it, and the state benefits from the taxes. You know, I think it should be more public-private. Keep the lodging somewhere practical, where people can get fed, where they can stay, they can have their fires, they can do whatever they want. Don't understand.
Okay.
One of the concerns I heard early on and repeatedly was about the logging. And then earlier this evening, you made quick work of separating the Conservation Commission from kind of a public conversation around the logging being a negative thing. I understand, you know, in the context of the woody adelgid issue that we have with regard to hemlocks or EAD potential. So could you just speak maybe to educate the group as a whole on why the state's proposed draft logging plan is effective forest management, please?
Well, I don't know. I can't comment on the mechanics of forestry and forest management, but I just know that, you know, they have a team that manages woodlands and knows how to do that, and follows forestry practices. So what they're doing are, to our understanding, is normal forestry practices that would happen on any woodlot. You know, that don't really have anything to do with the park aspect of it, but the only exception being that they remove what they call hazard trees, potentially harmful trees along pathways. But the rest of it is what you would do in any woodlot.
Well, I appreciate that characterization.
Yeah, and I would like to add that in our discussion, in our discussion with Forest Parks and Recreation, the logging is the only part of the plan they have said is a done deal. In other words, that's been finalized. So from a different perspective, well, they're telling us they're not even going to discuss it. So we're kind of looking at the things that are still in play.
So perhaps they're not going to discuss it because it's widely accepted best practices in the management of
Could very well be, yeah.
It is.
Right.
So if that's for the health of the forest, then that's not managing it for the health of the ecosystem. This is managing it as a woodlot and to have financial gain from the wood. It's managing for a young forest and to continue a young forest.
That's inaccurate.
No, not exactly. No, they selectively log to keep a lot of old growth and balance out the forest canopy and the nature of what's growing there. So it isn't like clear cutting or anything like that, even though there are small selective clear cuts. It's designed to have a balanced harvest, balance a number of trees and species.
And to prevent the invasion of two species of pests that are becoming increasingly more concerning, which is the hemlock woody adelgid, which affects hemlock trees, and the emerald ash borer.
I don't know that, maybe you know, I don't know that the logging plan has anything to do with impacting that.
I think a forestry management plan that includes a logging plan, because it's complicated and connected, considers all those things.
Okay.
And just to be balanced, Forest Parks and Recreation has recognized logging as part of the revenue stream for Lowell Lake.
Absolutely. That doesn't make logging not a good forest stewardship practice, and I think that's why the Conservation Commission is acknowledging that.
I think a lot of people don't like it because of what logging does. It makes a big mess. But,
it also creates biodiversity, which you really need.
That's part of why the mess is good.
Right. Yeah. That's what you need. For the different animals. Yeah.
Your comment about increasing recreation is a good one, and it's interesting. Are there any current state facilities where on a given weekday or weekend, we restrict access because the proverbial parking lot is full?
Well, I think they're restricting it here now. They do that now.
They're doing it now, yeah. I can't get into that.
So are there standards for facilities in terms of this park or this lake can only accommodate X number of people on any given day? And when we reach that standard or metric, we close it to the rest of the people that day?
No, I think the metric they use is cars. And when there is no more room for cars, that's when they close it off. Which makes sense. So the people who aren't coming by cars are neighbors. And they're not going to do it anyway. Yes?
Does anyone look at, I mean, like, the camping and recreation areas that are in the Green Mountain National Forest? I'm thinking of like Captain Pond.
What about
Well, that, looking at how many people go there per amount of space compared to here, because if you add, and they have camping, if you add that, if you add on the camping people, what that would do, use that as an illustration of what?
Well, you don't need to. I mean, whatever number of cabins there'll be, and what times number of people that it can hold, that's how many people it is. That's just,
But you already, I think, figured that out as far as like the size compared to the amount of overnight camping, the size of the lake, the size of the area. You've already, then what Low Lake has and what they're proposing for overnight camping is way beyond percentage of the others, yeah, for the size of it. Yeah.
you can't really compare it to something like Windhoek, because there's no water, there's the river, but there's no lake there. So as many people as you crammed into that space, for example, it wouldn't really tell you anything about what that is like in comparison to doing the same thing at Lower Lake. Other than they might make a bigger mess from being close together.
But that's camp.
Yes.
I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you have, I know you just got it today, but if you have any plans on how to distribute the answers you got from the stewardship?
We will do it through the email list.
Great.
Yes. And I can give you a copy, Bruce.
That'd be great, thanks.
Yes.
Yes, Marcia?
Letters to the editors of the papers is also a good thing to do, besides contacting your representative.
Yes.
If you walked away, if the state walked away from it, it still sounds like there are too many people who are using it right now, and that the environment is getting kind of destroyed by the number of people. Is there anything that the town would consider doing to limit that?
I've heard that argument before. The state's not going to walk away from it. It's just, it's not really, it's not a possibility. Well, I guess
Thank you.
we did well with time. So
Thank you, everybody.